This video deals with truth in regard to status. And this is a FOIA request and demand to correct information under the provisions of the Privacy Act that require that the federal government and its employees and agents have a duty and an obligation to maintain correct records. So, and what I want everyone to pay attention to as I read through this is I want you to hear the tone in which I'm writing, because a lot of people talk this thing about sovereignty, which tends to get people in trouble because most people don't really understand that nothing is absolute. The one thing that's continuous is change. So whenever we use the term sovereign, we have to ask sovereign relevant to what jurisdiction, or sovereign relevant to what's going on. You understand what I'm saying? Because there's always different jurisdictions, and the concept of sovereignty in one jurisdiction could not possibly be the same as the concept of sovereignty in another jurisdiction. So when I read through this, I want you to pay attention to my tone, the way I'm conveying myself. Is it coming off combative? Does it force or does it warrant an answer? Does the words that I say obligate the recipient to respond, right? Do I create any adhesion contracts when I write, right? And so understand and look at how I'm binding them into the communications. I offer this up as a training and a teaching tool. Again, like I said, I wasn't going to do this initially because it was really personal to me and I wanted some answers, and I'm still waiting on those answers. I could have received an answer, but I don't think I have yet. And I would tell you, the State Department and the Treasury and all these federal agencies are pretty quick about answering FOI requests, so I must have really put them in some difficult positions. Anybody of any organization that this, if this draws your attention, or if you want to reach out to me based off of this right here, if you want to share something with me, you can contact me at coaching@thctrust.org. And if you're watching this video, make sure you visit www.thctrust.org. Help support our ministry. You do that by creating a free account and donating to receive a few of our products from time to time, or joining the premium membership subscription group. Okay, so I start at the top of the letter using my proper appellation. Look up the word appellation. It's a better word to use. We got to start shifting and changing our vocabulary. So let's use appellation when we're dealing with ourselves and our proper status as opposed to name. So I start with the appellation Solomon L. Moore L. I indicate American, national, heir, executor, and beneficiary for the estate of Cedric Alex Doe. Basically, I'm saying I'm American because when you look in the older dictionaries, you're going to find out that American only applies to the dark copper complected people, or the indigenous and the Indian people. And I'm a national because I'm here. I was born here. My parents are from here. My parents' parents were from here. My parents' parents' parents was from here. And incidentally, I'm actually doing some DNA testing, having some DNA tests ran to see how far back I can track my ancestry, or my ties to this particular side of the Amexem, which is Northwest Amexem, what many of us call North, Central, and South America. What we call where we're at now, the United States of America. Anyways, I also indicate as that I am the heir. Whether we're talking about the great estate, you understand, which is everything over here where our ancestry is from, the estate that's currently under administration under the bankruptcy, right? Which is kind of where you get this whole, we're under a bankruptcy type of thing. Or whether we're talking about the estate for the trade name, for the Cedric Alex Doe, in my case, which is not really my trade name, but I'm just using that because I don't want to have my stuff all over the video. Many of you know it already. But whether I'm the heir for that estate, because there's an estate set up there also. When you understand what the capitis diminutio maxima is, which is the capitalizing of a name, which is a capitalizing of an account, really. So you have an account and you're capitalizing off of it. So you're escrowing some type of funds out of it. So capitis diminutio maxima, and it's almost like you're escrowing funds from an estate, or civil liter mortuus that deals with one losing. When you look all these things up, civil liter mortuus, capitis diminutio maxima, and the Cestui V Act from 1666, you're going to find out that all of those things link together and deal with the all capitalization of the name. So if you look at it from that regard too, you are also the heir of that estate that is already set up. And when you become aware of it, you rightfully protect your interest and make the claim and everything else. And some of that is, secured party status. I'm not harping on that because I know some people, feel strongly as if that's not the way for them, and I'm 100% okay with that. My understanding is that these commercial vessels, use them. That's my understanding, but use them with wisdom. Anyway, as I said, the United States passport was sent back with this, so I sent it under registered mail to the office of the Honorable Hillary Rodham Clinton. And I put I was very sure to place a name on here, right? Because this is a officer, someone that I can hold liable. This is a FOIA officer, government worker. And I know this because I found this on the Department of State website. And if things don't get done, then I can appoint her as fiduciary in regard to this matter because she's already a party to it. Because what this letter actually is, it's an FOIA request, which is Freedom of Information Act. And when you hear FOIL, that's Freedom of Information Law. And usually you're going to find that every federal agency, they report an FOIA officer because that FOIL, for whatever reason, is serious. When someone petitions them for information, they have to respond within certain guidelines and provisions. So, by going and demanding them to produce this, that, and the other, I used to do that when I first was learning this stuff, and I never got a response. But every time, I use the FOIA or whatever is set forth in the individual state that's similar, I always get a response. And that's what I use when I request insurance policies and oaths of offices and things like that. I use FOIA, even though you would think, they have to provide that information anyway. I use FOIA and I get excellent results. I also sent this to the Office of the Assistant of Legal Advisor for Treaty Affairs because within this, we're going to be talking about status and petitioning them for corrections and providing information. And I had to send this to the Legal Advisor for Treaty Affairs because I'm mentioning the Treaty of 1787. The peace treaty, or as they call the Peace and Friendship Treaty, that was agreed to and represents an engagement entered into prior to the Constitution for the United States. And then under Article 6, which you will also see in here, it says that all treaties and engagements entered into prior to that Constitution remain valid against the United States. So all the public trustees are obligated, just as much as they're obligated, they take that oath to swear and support the Constitution, so are they obligated to operate in accordance with its articles because they're just trustees and the articles is the guidelines. That's the laws basically of the trust. So understanding that, and the reason why Moors is always saying, that's our treaty is because in the treaty it says Moors. At least in the English version of it, it says Moors. And the treaty is still active. I'm not really dealing with, they don't honor it or they don't whoever. I don't really deal with the invisible they. I have a couple invisible theys on here, not really. The Honorable Hillary Rodham Clinton, she's not an invisible they. Marion Manheim, she's not an invisible they. That's an individual. That's a living person or whatever you want to call it. I can identify that person. You understand what I'm saying? So I know if I don't get a response, I know who to follow up with on an individual basis. So I also know that the treaty is still active, and I know that not any of these individuals will stand in my way or put anything in writing to say anything to the contrary, because that would be too much of a liability. So again, I want you to listen to the tone, and part of the reason why I want you to hear the tone is because this is how I communicate to not give somebody any wiggle room to not respond to my communications or to try to lump me into a category of a domestic terrorism or a paper terrorism or any other thing to give them excuse not to do what they're required to do. So this is a request to correct records under the provisions of the Privacy Act, and it's a petition regarding the status under the Immigration and Nationality Act, because that's what deals with status and nationalities and things like that. But now on the request to correct records under the provisions of the Privacy Act, we find that all government agencies and organizations have a duty to maintain correct records, and they can't keep false records. And if they receive notice of something that indicates something in their records need to be corrected, then really they have to do that, or then they've just set themselves up. Because if you prove you've given somebody notice and they have an obligation to correct records, and then you can ask to pull the record and the record hasn't been corrected, then they're in fault. And if they continue to default, then that's when you go into your enforcement, right? Which is anybody who has followed THCtrust.org knows that we do a lot of building and learning about how to enforce through administrative procedure and requesting oaths and insurance policies and bonds and things like that. Incidentally, if you've come across this video and you're not yet a member on thctrust.org, visit www.thctrust.org and log in, create a free account, but you got to create that account and log in, and then you'll have access to the rest of our resources. So anyway, remember, this is a request to correct records under the provisions of the Privacy Act, and it deals with the status of Cedric Alex Doe under the Immigration and Nationality Act 8 U.S.C. 1481. Also, as I read through this, I want to bring your attention to something else. A lot of people, I don't do the expatriation thing. The issue with expatriation seems to establish that there was a pre-existing bona fide legitimate contract, which I don't necessarily agree to that. So I'm not really expatriating per se. However, the act of declaring your nationality to another political subdivision of another nation or organization or religious organization as an operation of law constitutes expatriation. Just pay attention to that, right? Pay attention to the details as I read through. And I'm going to expound as I read through anyway. To the office of Hillary Rodham Clinton, greetings. I am Noble Solomon L. Moore L., the living, sentient being of Moorish-American nationality, asserting my right to be identified as indigenous according to Article 8 of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and Executive Order 13107. I am a descendant of the ancient Moabites, Moors, living with just sanguineous ties to the land of North America, home of my foremothers and forefathers. I reserve the right to petition the Federal Government of the United States through the trade name Cedric Alex Doe 123-45-6789, held in trust as parcel to the estate of Sylvester Alex Doe. Well, yeah, I was supposed to say Cedric Alex Doe, for which I am the heir and the executor. Okay, so notice I created the clear distinction of the living man who happens to be a Moorish-American of nationality. Now, usually I share with people not to take positions, especially positions that they can't readily prove, right? Because when you take positions, you can be held liable if you can't stand behind those positions. Taking positions is kind of like moving into the positive. But you can always take positions when you're doing it in a way that you're asserting a right that you absolutely know is your right. Because, as a matter of fact, in those instances, it's best that you take positions. But when it doesn't deal with your rights, when it deals with how you feel and your opinions and all of that stuff, then don't take a position. But I was saying that because in this writing, you're going to notice there's certain positions that I take, but I take those positions because I know there is no um, individual in the public working for the federal government in their rightful mind going to challenge me on the positions that I've taken, because for them to challenge me on those positions would require them to go against so many federal laws and statutes, and it pretty much require them to it'll lead them down the line to committing perjury or having to just come out and say, oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, right? You know, they cannot challenge the positions that I take in here. So when it's one of those type of positions, then I'll state positively, or I'll give what's called a positive averment, right? And I guess I'll point one out in here when I read through this. So, I did read through it. So notice I said I'm asserting my right to be identified as indigenous according to Article 8 of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and Executive Order 13107. I asserted the right, all right? And that right is acknowledged by Article 8 of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Remember, I did the video, President Obama, I think in 2010 or something, signed off on the Declarations of Rights of Indigenous People, which is one of the human rights instruments under the United Nations. And I've heard, and it kind of makes sense a little bit when you look at the hierarchy of law. You know, when you deal with these statutes and codes and constitutions and things, it would seem that the human rights instruments are on a higher level. I mean, yes, they're used on an international level. They're international documents, but I do believe they're also covenants, and they're supposed to have the force and the effect of treaties. And when we read through the Constitution, we find out that treaties, as well as the Constitution, constitute the supreme law of the land. So read the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. I'm going to put a link, a little hot link, so if you're actually reading this letter, you can click on it and download it. It's a very easy read. It's signed off on. And I also put in here Executive Order 13107. So just take a little second and Google that right now, just so you'll know. And I guess if I remember correctly, what it deals with is it requires the federal government or the executive agencies to enforce and implement the human rights instruments. So that would mean the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People. So this is a new obligation that they have taken on, but it does you nothing if you're not familiar with it. So just go look these things up that I wrote about in this letter. Let's see. All right, let me go into the next paragraph. The purpose of this letter is to give notice to the United States of my formal declaration of allegiance to the Moorish Divine and National Movement of the World, a political organization of Moorish-Americans who are American nationals by just sanguinis without 14th Amendment citizenship, whereas by an operation of law, this has the lawful effect of expatriation, according to sections 349A, 2, and 349A4 of the Immigrations and Nationality Act. Wherein it states that a national of the United States, whether by birth or naturalization, and in my little parentheses I would say including presumptions, shall lose his nationality by making an affirmation or other formal declaration of allegiance to a foreign state or political subdivision thereof after having attained the age of 18 years. So that's what they said, and then as you'll see in here, I've provided them evidence of the occurrence of just that. So I put, in accordance with your duty to maintain correct records under the provisions of the Privacy Act, I am requesting that you update and correct the records held in regard to citizenry and nationality as relates to these matters based on the records I am providing. And then what did I provide them? I provided them my declarations of status, which is affidavits. I've given them an active state document. I've also thrown in evidence of the UCC-1 financing statement that secures the paramount claim of interest over the estate. But more importantly, I gave them my Moorish nationality paperwork. I didn't give them, excuse me, but I've provided them with a copy of the notice of name correction, a notice of my proclamation of status, that deals with my nationality and and just that. So and this again. Oh, and I gave them a record of birth, and I gave them the passport back. Now, the reason I gave them the passport back is because the nationality in the passport said United States, right? And that's inconsistent with the reality. But let me go ahead and finish reading. This part deals with the Freedom of Information Act part, right? In addition to my request for the correction of records, because we see, excuse me, let me back up. So what I was asking him for, basically, is whatever you have that deals with my status, my nationality, and my citizenry, you must correct it to reflect the truth. And I provided them the declarations of status document, my Moorish documents, so they can look at the documents and determine whatever the truth is, according to how they do their records, right? So, and this goes into the request for information, the FOIA request that I'm petitioning the federal government through the trade name. Now, I wrote a couple, I did things dealing with the Privacy Act and FOIA, and I just sent this letter to all the relevant departments because I know that they will forward information to other departments to get answers if they can't answer all the inquiries in one department. In addition to my request for the correction of records, please provide me with the Department of State transcripts, reports, and profiles, or any other records in your custody or accessible through your database systems by which the United States depends upon for official indicators of citizenship status, domicile, residency, and nationality. I am further requesting that the custodian of such records supply any necessary definitions, explanations of acronyms, as well as a breakdown of all subclassifications of status, i.e. AA, A1, A2, B2, etc. These are different classifications of status. I know at least two of them are, but I'm asking them if you're going to give me this information that I'm requesting, also provide me a key or some definition so I can make sense of what it is. And I know they have this information. I know there's a breakdown. So then here's the key. Remember, so now we're dealing with things that deal with we're dealing with things that can be construed as expatriation. So in this climate, when one is dealing with this, you absolutely must have evidence of your status or something. And the evidence of your status could be an affidavit too. But I guess what I'm really trying to get to is the importance of bringing this treaty, the Treaty of Peace and Friendship of 1787. When you read Article 6, Section 2 of the Constitution, it basically shows that the United States is obligated to this treaty as well as all other treaties and engagements that was entered into prior to the establishment of the Federal Constitution for the United States of America. The Constitution for the United States of America under Article 6, Section 2 establishes the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, 1787, as the supreme law of the land. Now I twerked that a little bit because in reality it talks about the engagements entered into by the United States, and it talks about the treaties. But I just went on ahead and said the treaty because that was the engagement entered into right before the establishment of the United States. The Constitution for the United States of America under Article 6, Section 2 establishes the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, 1787, as the supreme law of the land, which confers duties upon the United States in respect to commerce and intercourse with Moors. As an American and a Moor non-United States citizen who is claiming entitlement and recognition under said treaty, and in further pursuance of this Freedom of Information Act request, I am requesting all records and information maintained on the process for achieving federal recognition of status under said treaty. I'm going to read that again. But first I want to say, I twerked out a little bit. When you read Article 6, Section 2, it does say that the treaties and the engagements entered into prior to the Constitution are still valid against the United States. So I went on and said it establishes the Treaty of Peace and Friendship. And really, when you look at the history, it absolutely does. I am under the belief that although it did say treaties and prior engagements, although it could have been talking about, I'm certain it was talking about several things. I think this treaty especially was on the forefront of many of the writers' minds just because of history, if you look at what was taking place. Um, but this confers duties upon the United States in respect to commerce and intercourse with the Moors. I say that because when you read that treaty, it uses the word Moors, and it talks about the commerce and the intercourse and what's supposed to happen, which is, that's a whole different thing. But and also, I would say any more, go get a copy of that treaty. You understand what I'm saying? Have a copy of it on you. Read through it, become familiar with it. As an American and a Moor, non-United States citizen who is claiming entitlement and recognition under said treaty, in further pursuance of this FOIA request, I am requesting all records and information maintained on the process for achieving federal recognition of status under said treaty. There is a process for that within the Department of State, I'm certain, and now I've put the burden or the requirement for them to produce that. I am returning the enclosed passport for correction, whereas it wrongfully indicates a nationality of United States of America, whereas it should be corrected to reflect my true nationality as a Moorish-American. In pursuance of your obligations, please correct and return the passport or send any documentation, applications, forms, and instructions as may be applicable and necessary to facilitate the correction of my citizenry, nationality, and the return or reissuance of the passport. You may reach me by mailing your communications in care of, and then I provided them an address. Yes, so I hope you enjoyed it. I hope the tone, I hope you learned something from the tone, and and I would like to hear your feedback. So thank you for watching. Make sure you visit www.thctrust.org if you like to support what we're doing. Create a free membership, and if you really want to support what we're doing, go ahead and pay $16 a month and join our premium subscription group.